What do you think is the creepiest / most disturbing unsolved mystery ever? Story 1. The Ibadan Forest of Horror in Nigeria. A local taxi driver goes missing and his friends create a makeshift search party and investigate a forest. Instead of finding their friend, they find an abandoned school or factory that have the remnants of a hellish torture, ritual killing, and human trafficking. 8 survivors were rescued. Numerous body parts, rotting corpses, and personal artifacts were found. The perpetrators were never found, although politicians and ritualists were suspects. Whilst the discovery is disturbing, the mystery for me is that the original taxi driver still hasn't been found. Story 2. I am an avid Unresolved Mysteries reader, and I don't know why it has stuck with me. Carly Hughes. 16-year-old girl called her stepmother to pick her up from a party. Reportedly was too scared to sleep because she thought someone would kill her, and the next day she disappeared. There was some weird interviews and dynamics between step-parents and birth parents, and a bunch of theories abound. Her father was just arrested for corporal injury to spouse. No further details have been released, but that's a pretty scary charge. Seems like the dad has anger issues and stepmom disliked the girl. Her poor mother. Story 3. The disappearance of Zeb Quinn. He was 18 years old when he went missing in 2000. He was working his shift at a local Walmart and afterwards wanted to look at a new car with a colleague, when he allegedly received a call that made him take off frantically and that he was never seen again. The strangest thing is that a few days later his car was found in a parking lot with the headlights turned on, a pair of lips and an exclamation mark drawn on the back window with pink lipstick, and a live Labrador puppy sitting inside. In 2017, the colleague was arrested for his murder, but all the strange details still make no sense at all. Story 4. The disappearance of Lars Matank, a German man who went on a vacation in Bulgaria in 2014. He was last seen at the airport where he was brought into a private room by airport security after his mother had called telling them her son was behaving strangely, saying there were people after him over the phone the night before. A few minutes later, he's seen bolting, and I mean full-on sprinting out of the room without his luggage. He ran out of the airport, scaled the huge fences around the perimeter, and was never seen again. Hundreds of witnesses, CCTV footage, and police presence, and the man still basically disappeared off the face of the earth in broad daylight. Story 5. Jessica Chambers. She was set on fire in her car and had gasoline poured down her throat. Paramedics found her walking down the lane on fire. The only part of her body that wasn't burned was the bottom of her feet. She did not survive. Police found a subject but did not have enough evidence to charge him. Paramedics were so traumatized by what they saw, they had to go through therapy and broke down on stage during interviews. She tried to name her attacker, but her throat was so destroyed, she couldn't be understood. Story 6. The murder of Lindsey Busiak. A case close to home for me that I don't see mentioned as much as it should. A relatively junior realtor in Victoria, British Columbia, is showing a luxury home to some clients, and the clients murdered her. The clients, a man and a woman, cold called her saying they needed to find something to buy ASAP. She was apprehensive of showing the property by herself and asked that her boyfriend came or wait outside or something. Turns out the boyfriend was running late and arrived around the same time as the murders occurred, but I don't believe he saw anything as the suspects fled the back door. It's believed that she was the victim of a professional hit for some unknown reason. Also, the cell phone that was used to contact her was purchased by someone in alias in Vancouver 6 or so months ago prior and was only ever used to contact her. Here's the Wikipedia. Story 7. La Cruces Bowling Alley Massacre. In February 1990, in Las Cruces, New Mexico, 2 intruders entered the bowling alley through an unlocked door before opening time. The cook, Ida Holguin, was forced by one gunman to go into the office where Stephanie Senek, her 12-year-old daughter Melissa Repis, and Melissa's 13-year-old friend Amy Hauser were being held by the other gunmen. The women and girls were forced to lie on the ground while the gunman stole $4,000 to $5,000 from a safe. The alley's pin mechanic, Steve Turen, arrived to the alley with his daughters, 6-year-old Paula and 2-year-old Valerie, who he'd been unable to find a babysitter for. The gunman then shot everyone. The gunman haphazardly set fire to the office, but it didn't burn much. After they left, 12-year-old Melissa was able to call the police despite being shot 5 times. She and the cook would survive their wounds. Melissa's mother, Stephanie Senek, would initially survive, but would succumb to complications 9 years later. 2-year-old Valerie would survive long enough to be taken to the hospital, but died there. The gunmen have never been identified. After the incident, Stephanie Senek's father, Ronald Senek, who I believe owned the bowling alley and was out of state at the time of the killings, didn't cooperate with authorities. Some believe that the killings might have been a targeted hit in retaliation against Ronald for something he did. Story 8. In my opinion, it's the city of San Francisco train derailment that occurred in Hardin, Nevada on August 12, 1939. The train, run by the Southern Pacific Railroad at the time, derailed at a bridge over the Humboldt River, at a speed range of 60 to 90 miles an hour. The accident resulted in 24 fatalities and multiple injuries. Days later, investigators discovered tools at the bottom of the Humboldt River, determining that the wreck was caused by sabotage of the rails. When I was 14, I lived in a very rural area. The neighborhood kids were all friends and we used to do some fucked up things. They definitely tried to derail a train. They used to put debris and other things in the middle of the highway to try to cause accidents. One time, a couple hit a tree branch that they had placed on the road. When the couple stopped, the kids threw rocks at them. Rural kids with dysfunctional family life. Story 9. The Disappearance of the Beaumont Children. The Beaumont Children are siblings who disappeared in 1966. There are still, to this day, investigations going on to try to find the remains of these children. There have been foundations of sheds and houses dug up. The children have never been found and the suspects has never been identified. Story 10. The Hinterkaifeck murders always freaked me out. I've read quite a bit about it, and it sounds like it was probably a neighbor. But the creepy part is that the killer was probably living/hiding out in the attic for multiple days beforehand. I read about this for the first time when I was on a multi-night hiking trip. I stayed in cabins. The first night, there was a loft above where we were sleeping. I stared at it all night. Story 11. Technically not unsolved, since everyone can guess what happened to her, but it's one of the creepiest in my opinion. Alyssa Turney was a teenager who disappeared in 2001. Her stepfather, Michael Turney, was obsessed with her. He stalked her at work, put cameras in the vents to spy on her, and made her sign contracts to say he'd never abused her. Michael picked her up from school early on May 17, 2001, and she's never been seen since. Her half-sister, Sarah Turney, has an amazing podcast called Voices for Justice, which explains the case in detail, and because of her, Michael Turney was arrested in August 2020. Story 12. I remember watching the Unsolved Mysteries episodes about a person in 1977 who would send creepy anonymous letters to random folk in a small town. Actually threatening ones too. The sender started by mailing up a woman and telling her, if I remember right, that they knew she was cheating on her husband with a superintendent, something she vehemently denied. They then threatened her husband by saying he'd be in danger if he did not stop the affair. The couple decided to take it upon themselves to hunt the sender down. That ended with the husband dead in his crashed pickup truck. The sender kicked the wife while she was down by leaving threatened signs along her bus route, at least one of which had an actual booby trap on it. They found and arrested a suspect, but it's still unknown today if he's actually the sender. He denies it. The idea that somebody has been quietly studying your life just so they could begin to anonymously blackmail you or make up a rumor to blackmail you with is pretty damn scary. Addendum. In 2021, a forensics professional claimed that the police were right all along and the suspect who was arrested by then was the sender. But the massive hole in her claim is how he was still able to write letters during his time in prison. Story 13. Not necessarily the most creepy or disturbing thing I know of, but it was close to me. A friend I went to school with from 6th to 12th grade was driving home when a car pulled up next to him and the driver him in the head. This was about 7 years ago. No one has any idea why or who the shooter was. No one has ever said anything. He had no enemies, was universally liked, never hurt anyone. He was 20. Our community is not large. Someone knows something but has never come forward. Real shame. Had a bright future. Story 14. Just yesterday, a colleague told me a personal account of a kidnapping of her friend. This happened when colleague and her friend were 10 years old. One day, instead of going straight home as they usually did, they went to the store to buy some candy. When they left the store, some guy stopped them. He started talking to the friend all like, "Your dad sent me to take you home. I've totally known you since you were a baby, blah blah blah." Heavily paraphrased, but you get the gist of it. So the friend got convinced that he really is there to take her home, so she agreed to go with him. This guy also offered a ride to my colleague as well, but she refused, and so this guy just drives off with the friend. There was a police search and everything. 25 years have passed since then, and no trace of her was ever found. Colleagues think that he picked her friend specifically because they were athletes at the time, and the school put their photos in the newspaper quite often. Story 15. In my hometown, there was a case of a 16-year-old girl named Chandra May. She was working in 1982, I think at a McDonald's. My mom was getting off her shift early, and Chandra wanted off early instead, so my mom let her swap. She never made it home. Her car was found on her long driveway with the door open. Her purse was open, but nothing taken. She was found almost a month later, hog-tied in a lake. She had at least DNA from 2 males. Had kept her hostage for weeks. I may be off on a few facts, but I guess it was so creepy because it was so close to home and they never found her killers. Story 16. I can't remember his name, but there was a case of a college-age young man, Brian, I think was his first name, who who was reported missing after a night out. There's security camera footage of him entering a bar, but absolutely no footage of him leaving. Like he went into the bar and just flat out dropped off the face of the earth. Last I knew, he's never been found and nobody knows what happened to him. ETA. Brian Schaefer, who went missing in Columbus, Ohio. Thanks, Reddit. Also ETA. Since it keeps coming up, the bar was on a second floor at the time with only one public entrance/exit. The police extensively reviewed all the security camera footage. Brian and everyone else who was there that night was seen on camera entering the bar. Everyone except for Brian, who was at the bar that night, was seen on camera leaving the bar, which would nix any theories that he left wearing different clothes/disguised as someone else/mixed in with the crowd. Story 17. One case that baffles and fascinates me is that of the Erickson Sisters. They are said to suffer from a shared psychosis known as foyer à deux. But what the heck is that and what caused it? They're the 40-year-old twin sisters from Sweden who became front page news in the UK in 2008 when they repeatedly ran into traffic on the M6 motorway. A day or two later, one of them, Sabina, stabbed a man in his home for no apparent reason. She fled the house, striking herself on the head with the hammer as she ran away into the highway bridge. She jumped off, falling 12 meters and landed on a highway. She survived with several fractures. I've heard the audio from a TV news crew who happened to capture part of the M6 incident and just can't forget one of them yelling at her sister about, "They'll steal your organs." Whatever happened to them was intense, sudden, and largely unprecedented. Story 18. David Glenn Lewis, missing from Amarillo, Texas on Super Bowl Sunday in 1993. He was an attorney and former judge. His wife and daughters were out of town for the weekend shopping. He stayed back. They got back and the VCR was set to record the game. He had a sandwich made in the fridge, and his wedding ring was next to the sink where he had left it and washed his hands. They figured out he was there before the game started, as they had to manually set the VCR. Over a decade later, in 2004, a John Doe was connected to him, all the way in Washington state. The circumstances of the then Doe's death, February 1st, 1993, Monday, one day after Lewis was assumed to be home last. A man was walking along Washington 24 at approximately 10:30 p.m. at night. He was fatally struck by a vehicle which fled the scene. He had no ID on him and was wearing what was described as Army surplus clothing. A cold case detective was able to connect it to Lewis in 2004 and give closure to his family. There are also so many other details. He told his wife he was in danger but wouldn't explain. Weird tickets were purchased, money was deposited, his car was found with his ID, wallet, etc. under the floor mats. This is the one I cannot shake from my mind. A pretty good short read, but I know there's some great write-ups here on Reddit too. Story 19. I don't know about creepy, but disturbing, yeah. Delphi murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Two teenage girls hiking on a trail in Delphi, Indiana. Walking across the bridge, one of them spots a creepy guy following them on the bridge and even films it. There's audio recording of suspected bridge guy ordering them to go down the hill. They were assassinated and found not far from the bridge they were on. That was years ago, and the murder is nowhere closer to being solved. Even with video of the suspect, the bridge guy. There's been new developments in the last year or two where people thought it might be some guy, but he got ruled out. Now it's a father/son suspected situation right now, and people seem to be holding out hope it's them. I personally don't think it is. But in any case, it's been years now. Doesn't look to be solved anytime soon. Very sad situation. Story 20. The spy is in a bag case. The death of M16 operative Gareth Williams, whose decomposing corpse was found zipped into a locked duffel bag in the bathtub on his flat. The key to the padlock was inside the bag under his body. There are many theories that he had been investigating Russian money laundering and tax fraud and paid the price. However, the police concluded that no one else was present at the time of death. There were no fingerprints or DNA found on the bathtub, including his own. It's a very strange story. Story 21. The ghost ship of Mary Celestia. It was an American merchant brigantine discovered adrift and deserted in the Atlantic Ocean on December 4th, 1872. Ship's cargo was intact, and captain and crew's personal belongings were undisturbed. None of the 10 people who were on board, including Captain Briggs, his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter, were ever seen or heard from again. Story 22. Jack the Ripper. There's a few victims compared to other cases, however the way it was done is horrible. It's a mystery unsolved since 1888, and that will never be. When you know that during that times, London smelled, was hidden by a thick fog, everything was dirty, and the people all struggled, despite the industrial boom. Imagine when you are from the lower class ever, knowing a serial killer is outside and you literally have nothing to protect you. Policemen were useless. It happened quick, and the killer disappeared. It put London in terror. Story 23. The disappearances of Felipe Santos and Terrence Williams. Two men go missing after being arrested by the same deputy within 3 months. He claims he dropped them off at Circle K stores, but his stories are inconsistent. They haven't been found since. My dad, having gotten his green card a few months before, was terrified of getting pulled over by cops since he was working in the same area. Story 24. The Who Put Bella in the Wych Elm Case. During or around World War II, a woman somehow ends up in a wych elm. She is then found years later by some kids playing in the woods after the tree had grown around her corpse. No one knows who she was or why she was in the tree. She was from a nearby town, or if she was a spy, and her death was probably in World War II. Yet again, sometimes later, strange graffiti messages started showing up, asking the question, who put Bella in the wych elm, hence the case's name, although the victim's name is probably not Bella. Story 25. The Valicia Axe Murders. Josiah Moore and his family bought the house in 1903 and lived there until 1912. On the night of June 9, 1912, the 6 members of the Moore family and 2 children had severe head wounds inflicted with an axe. The scene was so horrifying that it is said that they took the sinking of the RMS Titanic, which occurred 2 months earlier, off the front page of the newspapers. Story 26. Pravin Varghese, a 19-year-old Indian American who was found dead in the woods in 2014. He had bruises from head to toe, but the police kept saying he died of hypothermia and was drunk and high. They hired a pathologist and he confirmed it. Family wasn't allowed to see him until later. When they saw the wounds, they called in another pathologist who said he died of blunt force trauma, not hypothermia. The police were really just dickheads in this case. Some gauge guy who admitted to hitting him and seeing him go into the woods was indicted for it in 2017, but his father paid $1 million for the bail and he roams free. There's so much about this case I wish everyone could look into. Story 27. One that is so bizarre that it is disturbing is the Yuba County 5. I know the men had mental disabilities, but how they ended up in the situation they did is just chilling to think about.